All right, turn with me if you would to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. We're going to be in different parts of 1 Samuel here this morning. So I want to just let you know we're going to jump around a little bit because we're talking about real intimacy. Real intimacy. And as you saw in that game that we just played, was that an indication of real intimacy? I mean, we've got couples that are holding up their opinion about things. I know sometimes we think just knowing things about each other is what real intimacy is really all about, but that's not really it. I mean, if my wife and I were playing that game, that very first question, who's the better driver, she would have held up the her, and I would have held up the him. Well, because we define it differently, right? She defines it as she's the better driver because she is the more cautious one. She's the one that follows the rules more closely and obeys the laws all the time, that kind of thing. I would hold up mine because I would say that I'm the better driver because I have a wider range of skills, right? I can drive a standard. You know, I can use a clutch. I can drive a big rig that's pulling a trailer, things that she doesn't want to do. So that isn't really an indication of what real intimacy is. And so my question this morning is, what is real intimacy? And where does it come from? Is it only between a man and a woman in a marriage relationship? Or can it be real intimacy? Can real intimacy be found in our friendships? Can you find real intimacy with a brother or sister in Christ? And I believe that answer is yes. And we're going to look at how that's possible here this morning. So we're going to bounce around in 1 Samuel. But the first thing I want us to look at is in Genesis. Genesis chapter 3, verse 24 says, talks about how we were once in an intimate relationship with God, but then how that was broken. You see, from creation, we see that we were created for real intimacy. When Adam and Eve were first created, did they have an intimate relationship with God? I would say walking around naked and being unashamed about it is pretty intimate, right? I don't know how you get much more intimate than that, all right? But they were unashamed because they had no reason to be, because their creator, think about it, if anybody knows everything about you, it's your creator, right? And so when they were first created, they were walking and talking with God. It was something that God designed to be the best version of our relationship with him. And so it was God's perfect design was total intimacy. But we see in Genesis chapter 3, verse 24, that the fall, the introduction of sin ruined all that for us. It says here in verse 24, so he drove the man out. And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword, which turned to every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. You see, I often used to wonder, why would God kick him out of the garden and that sort of thing? And I came to the conclusion a long time ago that was the ultimate showing of God's mercy. See, he had the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And he didn't bar them from that, and he had the tree of life. He didn't bar them from that either until they fell. Until they entered into a sin relationship which broke the intimacy between them and God. And God did not want them to continue forever in that broken relationship. So at that point, it became a requirement. It became necessary to bar them from eating of the tree of life. He didn't want them to live forever in eternal separation from him. It's the same desire he has for each and every one of us. He doesn't want us to live forever in eternal separation either. That's why he provided us a way to escape the consequences of hell. But we need to understand that because of the fall, since then, all of our earthly relationships have been marred by sin. Right? Once sin entered the world, it changed things for all of us. Now, intimacy is no longer a natural state of being. Now, intimacy is something that we have to struggle for. It's something that we have to work for. It's something we have to be intentional to get to. It's not the default that we were created for. It's something we now have to struggle, and we try to find it in these substitute relationships, right? If we struggle with our intimacy with God and with others, we find ourselves going online to have relationships. Do you know how many people meet online these days? It used to be where would you go to find a wife or a husband? Some people would say, well, you go to church. That's the best place to find one. Or some people would say, well, you go to the bar. It's like, well, you may not find the right one you're looking for there. But nowadays, you know how most people meet? They meet online, right? It's about swiping through endless profiles. And, it's like, oh, how superficial, right? Oh, I don't know. That one looks okay. It's like, finally, there's one I like. And it's like, it's so difficult. But we try to find these relationships either online or whether it be through followers, or we have superficial friendships. Sometimes we think, well, the person I'm most intimate with is my therapist, the person I can tell everything to because I'm paying them to not judge me, right? But most of the time, these are unhealthy relationships because they're all a poor substitute for the kind of intimacy that can only be found through God. When we have a relationship with God, we can find intimate relationships with each other. So that brings me to the real intimacy's source. Where does this real intimacy come from? If we want to have those deep relationships, where does that come from? I invite you to turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18, I'm going to read to you verses 1 through 5, and we're going to talk about a great biblical example of an intimate kind of friendship, a friendship between David and Jonathan. Now, let me give you a little background before we get into this. Who were David and Jonathan? Well, David was the one that was anointed to be the new king after Saul, the first king. Right? Saul was anointed as the first king. He was basically chosen because he was the guy that was taller than everybody else, right? The nation of Israel wanted a powerful, a mighty king, and so Saul was anointed. He was put in the position as king, and Jonathan was Saul's son. Now, you would think the way monarchies are supposed to work, Jonathan was going to be the next in line to be the next king, but God had other designs. God had another way of looking at it, and he says, you know what, I'm going to choose the right person with the right heart to be the next king. And so he told Samuel to anoint David as the new king. Now, you would think that would put David and Jonathan at odds with each other, and yet they became the best example of an intimate friendship that we could have. So we're going to look at that this morning. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 5 says this, Now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered. And Saul sent him over the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Now I want you to think about that imagery for a moment. It wasn't just that they had something in common, right? It wasn't just that they enjoyed each other's company. It says that their souls were knit together. In other words, it was as if God had ordained them to come together in this way. Right? Have you ever been around somebody? Have you ever just met somebody that you just instantly connect with? We call it chemistry these days, right? You go and hang out with someone, whether it's a dating relationship or just a friend kind of thing. You go and you find out, oh, we've got a lot of things in common, or we think the same way, or we get excited about the same thing, and before you know it, you act like you've been best friends your whole life, even though you may have only met them yesterday, kind of thing. We call that chemistry, but I imagine that's how it would have been described here. The soul of Jonathan and David were knit together. And you say, well, what did they really have in common? You see, I believe, first of all, it was a shared love of God. A shared love of God. We're all familiar with how David trusted in God, right? We all remember the Goliath story, right? David said, I will go and I will fight. Why? Because God is going to fight for me. I know that it's not me that's going to defeat this Philistine. And so we all know that David had a faith in God's ability, because we saw that played out in the story of David and Goliath. But what about Jonathan? What do we know about Jonathan's faith in God? Well, we get a preview of that. We get a small glimpse of that in another part of 1 Samuel. So I'm going to read to you 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 6. This is Jonathan talking to his armor bearer. This is in a situation where he's going up against a band of Philistines. It's him and his armor bearer. It's two guys going up against a much more powerful force, a lot more warriors. And what does Jonathan say? He says this to his armor bearer in chapter 14, verse 6. He says, "Let's go across to see the pagans." Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Perhaps the Lord will help us, for nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle whether he has many warriors or only a few." Well, that sounds a whole lot like the way David thought about God, doesn't it? He says, maybe the Lord will help us, because nothing can hinder the Lord. Nothing is beyond what the Lord. So here we see that there's a shared love of God. Jonathan felt the same way about God that David did. He said, listen, I understand who God really is. I understand how powerful he is, and I know that when he's fighting for us, no one can defeat us. It sounds like the same kind of mentality that David had. They had a shared love of God. I believe another reason why they were knit together was because they had a common purpose. A common purpose is a great way to develop intimacy with one another. It's amazing the camaraderie that develops when men share a job. You know what I'm talking about? I remember when we were adding on to our church up in Oregon, and we were building this new addition, and we were taking turns. We were going through and doing different things, work days and that sort of thing. And me and another guy, his name was Ray Tillman. Ray Tillman was a guy in our church that I didn't know very well. I knew his son. His son was in my youth group at the time. I was a youth pastor and that kind of thing. So I knew him as this youth's parent. That's all I knew him as. But and he had been attending church, and we'd been going to the same church for a while. But that's possible for you to go to the same church as somebody and not really know them, right? Well, we got put on the same crew where we were hanging sheetrock in hallways. Now, this addition that we had built onto our church was a building much like this one. It was a central metal building, but what we did is we built a ribbon all the way around the outside of the metal building. This ribbon, it was an additional 30 feet or so, was where classrooms were and bathrooms and that kind of thing. So we extended that. So and every bit of it had a hallway that went around it. I swear there was probably 1.5 miles of hallways in that building. I mean, there was just hallways everywhere. And so we got put on the crew to sheetrock the hallways. So we worked together on this same job for hours. I mean, hours and hours and hours and hours. I mean, we would come in every workday and we would pick up where we left off. We're just hanging more sheetrock, and we became the hallway brothers or whatever. And I tell you what, in that time together, working together, me and Ray Tillman got to know each other very well. Well, because we were working together, we had a common purpose. And what happens when you start working with someone? You start asking them questions. So what do you do? What do you do for a living? Where'd you learn how to sheetrock? How's your life looking? Or what are you excited about? What's going on this weekend? Or what'd you do last weekend? You start sharing things together, and you start developing. When you have a common purpose, you start to live life together. You start walking the same path together. You develop a closer and closer relationship. It's kind of the foxhole mentality. Have you guys ever heard of the foxhole mentality? Foxhole mentality is based out of wartime, right? When you had soldiers that would share the same foxhole. What was a foxhole? That was a hole that you would dig as cover from enemy fire, and you weren't worried about personal space. It's amazing when someone's shooting at you, you'll crowd up with anybody, right? If you've got protection and cover, you'll jump in that hole with somebody. You start sharing a hole with someone in the midst of a trying time, you start to develop a bond very quickly. You know, I've never been to war. I've never been in the armed services. I've never been in that situation, but I've talked to people who have been, and they'll tell you, you know what? You don't really know a man until you share a foxhole with him. Right? There's a level of intimacy when you have a shared purpose, a shared experience. I know that me and some brothers and sisters in Christ, our fellowship riders, we just got back. Last weekend we went on our annual narrow road ride, and we spent 3 days driving around Durango and southern Colorado. We went and stayed in Durango. We went to Pagosa Springs and up over several passes, and we came back and we worshiped last Sunday in a church in Silverton, which was a really cool experience. And you know, it's one of those things where there are certain things that I can tell you about our trip. There are certain things that I can't tell you about our trip because whenever you go on a trip with other people, things happen that, you know, it's like, you know, what happens on the narrow road ride stays on the narrow road ride, right? You know, there's some intimacy there. I could drop a few words, you know, here or there, and I could make about 7 other people snicker and giggle, right? I won't do that because I made a vow. We cut our hands and blood. No, we didn't do that. But you know, because we have a shared experience, right? We were doing something together, and so that can bring about some intimacy. So it's not just a shared love of God or a common purpose. It can also be celebrated victories. Celebrated victories. When you experience victories together, it bonds you. Right? It's amazing how you can find friends just about anywhere if you're both rooting for the same thing. It's one of the reasons I like sports. I can go to a Packers game in Denver, and I can instantly know who my friends are going to be because I can simply look around and find the green jerseys. Anybody wearing orange and blue, they're the enemy. I don't want to talk to them, but they could be complete strangers. If I see an Aaron Rodgers or a Brett Favre jersey or something like that, I know I'm going to stand next to that guy, and we're going to celebrate together because the Packers are definitely going to win this year. They lost last year, whatever, shut up. Right? Because we can celebrate victories together. And so when you share those victories, and that's the key. Too many of us don't share our victories. We don't share anything. Right? You guys all have those friends. You just never know what's going on in their lives, right? You know, you talk to them about what's going on in your life, but you never hear anything back from them. Sometimes you got to pull information out of people. You guys, we need to learn that when we share our victories, that we develop intimacy. We develop that celebrated victory together becomes a common point that helps develop our relationship. You know, as I often tell, as I say at weddings and that kind of thing, you know, when I talking to a husband and a wife that are coming together, I tell them, I say when you share your victories, when a joy is shared, that joy is doubled, right? And when a sorrow is shared, that sorrow is halved. See, that brings me to the other way that we can develop real intimacy is by supporting each other's failures. Supporting each other's failures. You see, we all fall. How do we pick one another up? See, again, we go back to that. In order for someone to share and to support you and to help carry the load in your failures, you've got to be willing and vulnerable to share those failures. To share those times where you struggle or where you need help. Because when failures are shared, then our sorrow is halved. You see, a Christian brother or sister can come alongside and they can help carry that burden for you. For one thing, it helps if you're willing to share it because it helps to know that you're not alone. Did you know that there's nothing new under the sun? Right? All you got to do is look at Hollywood today. right? What are they doing? They're churning out remakes, right? They're churning out these new movies that are just recycled old movies. You guys know I'm a Star Wars fan. I had somebody ask me one time. They said, "Well, how do you feel about the sequel trilogy? How do you feel about episode 8, the one with Rey and that sort of thing?" And I said, "Well, I liked it better. I liked it better when it was called A New Hope." I was like, it was the same story, just retold. I mean, it's even got a trench run at the end, and they blow up the thing that's blowing up the planets. I mean, it was such a recycled story. So there's nothing new under the sun. So what makes us think that when we fail, when we have something that happens to us, what makes us think that we're the only ones? What makes us think that no one will understand? What makes us think that, well, I'm sure this has never happened to anyone else. No one understands what I'm going through. That is a lie Satan wants us to believe, because if we believe it, it'll keep us from sharing it, and it'll keep our sorrow from being halved. See, when we share our failures, we grow more intimate with the people that come alongside to support us. So that's where real intimacy comes from. But what is the test of real intimacy? What is the test of real intimacy? I want to draw your attention to 1 Samuel chapter 23. 1 Samuel chapter 23. This is later on in the story of David and Jonathan. You see, when Jonathan first met David, he didn't yet know that David was going to be the new king. At this point, he does know. When Saul finds out that David's going to be the new king, what does Saul decide? Saul decides, I got to get rid of this guy, right? I'm going to plot to kill him. He tries different things, tries to get him killed in battle, tries to take him out himself, all these things, because Saul now sees David as a threat and hates David. But what does that change the way Jonathan feels about David? So chapter 23, verses 16 through 18 says this. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horesh, and encouraged him in God. Thus he said to him, "Do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you. And you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. And Saul my father knows that also." So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. And David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went to his house. What is the test of real intimacy? The test is simply this: can you be trusted? Can you be trusted? Can you be trusted to be an encourager, both in and out of the faith? Can you be trusted? If you want to have an intimate relationship with someone, you have to prove yourself trustworthy as a friend. Right? And we see Jonathan does that with David here. We see here, number one, that he was an encourager. Look what it says there. It says, Saul's son arose and went to David at Horesh and encouraged him in God. Can you be an encourager to people, to a friend? And I want to talk to the guys for a minute here, right? Us guys, we have a twisted sense of friendship, don't we? Who's the person that makes fun of you the most? Guys, your best friend, right? I have a best friend. He lives in Oregon. He's been my best friend since I was 17 years old. He knows every story. He knows everything about me, and he is the first one that will remind me of the stupid things I've done. And hey, it's okay. I do the same thing to him. Right? I actually saw a statistic that I believe it says the strongest friendships when it comes to men are usually built around giving each other a hard time, and that kind of thing. That's just how men relate. Women look at how men relate and they think, oh my gosh, if my friend had done that to me, I wouldn't be her friend anymore. Right? We're like, that was a good one. Wait till I zing you back, right? So men, we're a little different, but we need to remember that yes, you can have that fun. You can send each other those zingers and that kind of thing. I can give Dennis a hard time because he's bald, or I can give Richard a hard time because he's got a bum knee, or I can do those things, but I also need to remember to be an encourager. Right? Those are the times where things are lighthearted and we can have some fun. When somebody does something stupid on their motorcycle or somebody does something silly and we poke some fun at them. But when it comes down to it, am I an encourager? Am I lifting my brother up? You see, David was encouraged by Jonathan. Jonathan knew that David was having a hard time. Jonathan knew that his father Saul was trying to hunt down and kill David. He knew the effect that was going to have on him. And so he found him and he came and he encouraged him in the Lord. Guys, if all we ever have is that superficial poking fun at and all that other stuff, and we never get to the encouragement, we're never going to experience real intimacy. There's a time and a place for everything. We need to learn how to be encouragers in the Lord. Can you be trusted to be an encourager? Can you be trusted to be a defender? Look at verse 17. Thus he said to him, do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul, my father, will not find you. Now, Jonathan has a split loyalty here, doesn't he? He's got his loyalty to his father, which I'm sure he loved his father, and I'm sure he loved his king, and he loved his nation, and that kind of thing. But he could have sold David out, couldn't he? Couldn't he have gone back and said, hey, Dad, I know where David is. He's over here at Horesh. I can take you right to him. But what does Jonathan do? Jonathan proves himself trustworthy to be a defender of David. He comes to him and he says, listen, I know that my father will not find you. First of all, because I will not sell you out. See, one of the things that breaks down our intimacy with each other the fastest is the fear or the knowledge that your friend can't be trusted to defend you. What does that look like? When that person comes and says, oh man, that guy, can you believe him? And you have the opportunity to be his defender, but instead you say, yeah, I know. He can really be this or that. I guarantee you that's going to break down the intimacy that you can, because you can't be trusted to be a defender. Can you be trusted to be a supporter? Look what he says there. He says, and in the end of verse 17, he says, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be where? Next to you. I will be next to you. I will be supporting you. I will be holding you up. I will be encouraging you. I will be right there with you. You see, if you cannot be a supporter, if you cannot be someone that can be trusted, even in the face of opposition, Jonathan knew he was taking a position that was contrary to what his father wanted. He was saying, I am going to be your supporter. I know that you're going to be the king, and I will be right there next to you. See, can you be trusted to be a supporter? And the last thing is, can you be trusted to do all those things even when the other person is not around? Look at the very last verse. So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went to his house. See, too many of us are friends with the people that we're friends with when we're around those people. And then when we get around other people, we become their friend. Have you ever got, you guys know chameleons? These people that kind of take on whatever they're around. When they're around positive people, boy, they're positive. Oh, yeah, it's really great. When they're around negative people, they're, oh, yeah, it's horrible. Right? When they're around this person, they're this person's friend. But when they're around this person, they're that person's friend. And the problem is, if this person has a problem with that person, the one that goes back and forth, if you're not loyal, when he's not around, you become this person's friend. And before you know it, you're bad-mouthing that person. So you can't be trusted. You will never find real intimacy because you don't know how to be a real friend, even when they're not around. You see, Jonathan accepts that David will be king, and this is a perfect opportunity for Jonathan to become an adversary. See, remember, I want to remind you, Jonathan was the one who was next in line to be king, right? Here's Jonathan saying, I know you will be king, and I will be right there next to you. when really Jonathan had every right in the eyes of earthly law and the way that monarchies worked. Jonathan, he could have been king. It's like, hey, my dad is king. When my dad dies, I'm supposed to be the next king. And yet he took a position because of his love for God, because he recognized that David was God's chosen anointed one. He put himself in a position of being a friend. And through his intimacy, he decided not to become the adversary. See, Jonathan's love of God and intimacy with David allowed him to not only accept David's elevation over him, but a position of service to him. He said, you will be king, and I will be right there next to you. You see, the reason why most of us don't have intimate relationships, the reason why most of us don't get to that place of intimacy with other people is because of what? Fear. Fear of what? Is it fear of the unknown or fear of things that have never happened before? No, it's actually fear of things that we've seen over and over and over again. You see, the danger of such intimacy, the reason why it's so hard to put yourself out there, the reason why it's so difficult to make yourself so vulnerable is because we've all been burned by people before. You see, when you get to a place of intimacy, the danger becomes, it's very easy to become jealous, right? We can be jealous of other people's success. It's hard to stand there and support your friend when your friend gets promoted instead of you. It's hard to stand there and lift your brother or sister up when they get the thing that you've been praying for. I remember when my wife and I were younger, when we first got pregnant, there was another couple in our church that had been trying to get pregnant for a long time, and we kind of lost them as a friend because they had been trying for so long. And when we decided to go off birth control and that sort of thing, it didn't take us very long, and God blessed us with our first child fairly quickly once we decided we were ready to have kids. And that tore that other couple up. They couldn't be happy for us because they were so jealous of the blessing that they felt like they deserved, but we got. See, the danger is that we could be jealous. That we could also become judgmental. We could become judgmental. I mentioned something in our men's Bible study a couple weeks ago. I was talking about a struggle I was having with somebody, and my dad said something. He said, see, son, he said, that's why I've always believed that pastors can't really have close friendships. What he was talking about, he was talking about there's always the danger that if you let someone get too close, that they'll become judgmental. And that's a risk that pastors have to deal with. Can I be myself with this person? If I'm truly myself, that means I'm going to expose my flaws. And will they be able to continue to see me as pastor once they realize that I struggle with sin, or I struggle with this or that? Or are they going to become judgmental, and before you know it, they're going around telling other people about my sin or this kind of thing? That's always something that's always present in the back of your mind when you're in leadership, when you're in a position of where people look to you or look up to you or that kind of thing. And so it's always difficult because you're always taking the risk. And I feel that. And I had to apologize to a couple of my friends who were there in the room because I didn't qualify that statement very well, and they were just kind of like, oh, well, I thought we were friends, and I don't know, I guess we're really not. And I had to go to them and apologize because, but I even then I had to tell them, I said, but guys, this is still a fear that I have. I still have this fear that if I'm too open, if I'm too honest, if I let you know that I'm struggling with this or that, will that make me lesser in your eyes? And eventually will you begin to say, I can't follow him as a pastor. I can't look at him the same way. You see, because the danger is there's always going to be a danger of judgment. Right? There's going to be the danger that it could turn into gossip. What if I share my struggles and it turns into gossip? I'm going to leave that one alone for right now, just because, that's a little too close to home a little bit right now, because we all experience that, don't we? We're open and honest about our struggles, and before you know it, we're hearing things back from other people. It's like, wow, that's not at all what was happening. Because it got turned into gossip. It got thrown into the gossip machine, and speculation took the place of truth. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're being accused, or you're being looked at in a different way because the gossip machine is something that Satan loves to deal with. These are all things that make us afraid to be intimate with other people. See, the final danger is that you could be an extortionist. An extortionist. Well, remember, I know more about you than you want other people to know. So you need to go ahead and do what I want to do. Now you say, oh, that's so shady, and that's so wrong. You're right, it is. Does that mean it doesn't happen? See, those are the things that we become afraid of. And that's what keeps us from being open and vulnerable, and that's what's robbing us of the intimacy that God wants us to experience. And guys, we need to recognize them for what they are. They are lies and tools of Satan that is trying to keep us isolated and trying to keep us unsupported, unencouraged, all those things that intimate relationships are supposed to bring us. We become lacking in those things because of all these other things that have happened. Do you remember what I talked about our last sermon? What do you have to do in order to have the right kind of friendships? You have to first be the right kind of friend. So you have to make the decision for yourself. You know what? When someone makes themselves vulnerable, when someone opens their life up to me, I'm going to make sure I put my own heart in check. I'm going to make sure that I don't become jealous. I want to celebrate somebody's victory, not just wish it was mine. I want to make sure that I don't become judgmental. I'm going to remember that they're flawed and human just like I am, and I'm going to show them grace and forgiveness the way God shows me grace and forgiveness. I'm going to remember that I don't need to be telling their business to anybody else. I'm not going to participate in the gossip machine. Right? Because in order for me to have that kind of friend, I have to be that kind of friend. I'm going to choose to be the encourager. I'm going to choose to be the defender. I'm going to choose to be the supporter so that I might experience the same in return. And together, my soul may be knit with someone else's through a common love of God, because we share a common purpose, and through common experiences, I might have the kind of friendship that David and Jonathan had. And I might experience the kind of intimacy that God designed me for in the first place. Would you bow with me for a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, as we're here this morning, as we examine our friendships, Lord, first of all, I ask that you would help us to identify the lies of Satan, the tools that Satan uses to keep us from the kind of relationships that you designed us for. Lord, I know that one of the greatest tools that he uses is fear. He reminds us of the bad experiences that we've had, and so it makes us afraid to be vulnerable again. He reminds us of the past failures that we've experienced, so we won't try and do it again. And that fear holds us back, and it keeps us isolated, and it keeps us from having those kind of friendships and that kind of intimacy that you designed us for, and it keeps us weak. It keeps us on the defensive. It keeps us worried about our own lives and our own situations instead of battering down the gates of hell. Lord, help us to understand that we are where we are because we've believed Satan's lies. Satan tells us that it's not possible to have the right kind of relationships, that we'll never have good friendships, that we'll never be supported or encouraged or defended, that we'll never experience that. And we believe it. Lord, I pray for every person here this morning that they would, instead of believing Satan's lies, they would believe your promise. They would look at the life of David and Jonathan, and they would see that it is possible. It is something that if we're both focused on you, if we're both following you, and if we have that common love and that common purpose, that we can be open and vulnerable. And there are those out there that know they're not going to be perfect, but if they're working towards the same thing we are, we can experience that together, and together we become stronger. Together our souls can be knitted together. And we become more effective, more powerful in your kingdom, and more of a threat to that liar Satan. Well, that's my prayer for everybody here this morning. That we would take the chance, put our hearts out there, that we would seek after the kind of relationship you've designed us for, not just with you, but with others that are searching and pursuing you as well. It's in your holy name I pray. Amen. Cut. How long was that? Okay.